The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Harper Lane's corner office on the 47th floor of the Meridian Tower in Manhattan. The city sprawled below her like a kingdom she had conquered, but tonight, it felt more like a prison. The headlines on her laptop screen glowed accusingly. Lane Enterprises CEO accused of insider trading, and the Ice Queen's empire crumbles. Harper's fingers trembled as she reached for her third glass of bourbon that evening. At 32, she had built Lane Enterprises from a small tech startup into a billion-dollar empire, earning her the nickname the Ice Queen for her ruthless business tactics and complete emotional detachment. She had never let anyone close, especially men, who she viewed as nothing more than stepping stones or obstacles in her path to success. "Ms. Lane?" Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The board members are here for the emergency meeting." Harper straightened her Armani blazer and walked into the boardroom where 12 stern faces awaited her. The accusations were flying: insider trading, market manipulation, breach of fiduciary duty. The evidence was circumstantial, but in the court of public opinion, she was already guilty. "Harper," said Richard Blackwood, the lead board member, his voice heavy with disappointment, "we think it's best if you step down temporarily. Let the investigation run its course. Take some time away from the company." The words hit her like a physical blow. This company was her life, her identity, her everything. Without it, who was she? 2 hours later, Harper sat alone in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. The silence was deafening. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and former allies who now treated her like a pariah. She had built walls so high around her heart that now, when she needed support the most, she found herself completely alone. That night, as she stared at the city lights through her window, Harper made a decision that would change her life forever. She needed to disappear, to find somewhere far from the judgment and the noise, somewhere she could think clearly and figure out how to rebuild her shattered world. She pulled out her laptop and began searching for remote locations. Her finger hovered over a listing for a small cabin rental in Millbrook, Tennessee, population 847. It was the complete opposite of everything she knew, everything she was. Perfect. The rental car's GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, leaving Harper to navigate the winding country roads of Tennessee with nothing but a hand-drawn map from the gas station attendant. The landscape was a stark contrast to the concrete jungle she called home. Rolling hills covered in autumn foliage, weathered barns, and endless fields stretching toward the horizon. When she finally found the cabin, Harper almost laughed at the irony. The rustic log structure, complete with a wraparound porch and rocking chairs, looked like something from a country music video. It was charming in a way that made her uncomfortable. Too simple, too honest. The next morning, Harper ventured into downtown Millbrook, which consisted of a main street lined with family-owned shops, a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s, and a small farmer's market set up in the town square. She felt like an alien in her designer jeans and cashmere sweater, drawing curious stares from the locals. That's when she saw her. Evelyn Carter was arranging mason jars of honey at her booth, her auburn hair catching the morning sunlight as it fell in gentle waves around her shoulders. She wore a simple sundress and work boots, her hands showing the honest calluses of someone who worked the land. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a natural grace, that made Harper stop in her tracks. "Fresh honey, straight from our hives," Evelyn called out with a warm smile as Harper approached. Her voice carried a soft southern accent that felt like honey itself. "First time at our market?" "Yes. I'm visiting," Harper replied, suddenly self-conscious about her own clipped New York accent. "I'm staying at the Miller cabin up on Ridge Road." "Oh, you're the city lady Mrs. Henderson mentioned." Evelyn's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "I'm Evelyn Carter. Welcome to Millbrook. What brings you to our little corner of the world?" Harper hesitated. She couldn't exactly say she was a disgraced CEO hiding from a corporate scandal. "I needed a change of pace, some quiet time to think." Evelyn nodded knowingly. "Sometimes the best thinking happens when you slow down enough to hear yourself. This honey here," she held up a jar, "comes from bees that have been working these fields for generations. There's something to be said for staying connected to the land, to what's real." As Evelyn spoke about her family's farm, her passion was evident in every word. She talked about the challenges of small-scale farming, the satisfaction of growing something with your own hands, and the importance of community. Harper found herself genuinely listening, not calculating, not strategizing, just listening. "Would you like to try some?" Evelyn offered, dipping a small wooden stick into the honey. "It's wildflower. The bees collect from all over our valley." Harper tasted the honey, and it was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Sweet, complex, with hints of clover, and something indefinably wild. "It's incredible." "That's the taste of home," Evelyn said softly, and something in her voice made Harper's chest tighten unexpectedly. Harper bought 3 jars of honey she didn't need and found herself lingering at the booth, asking questions about farming, about the town, about Evelyn's life. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about profit margins or market shares. She was just present. As she walked back to her car, Harper caught herself looking back at Evelyn's booth. The young woman was helping an elderly customer, her patience and kindness evident in every gesture. Harper had spent her entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from her: money, connections, power. But Evelyn had looked at her with simple human warmth, asking for nothing in return. That night, as Harper sat on the cabin's porch with a cup of tea sweetened with Evelyn's honey, she realized she hadn't thought about Lane Enterprises or the scandal for hours. For the first time in months, she felt something approaching peace. Harper had planned to stay in Millbrook for a week, but as days turned into 2 weeks, she found herself settling into an unfamiliar rhythm. She woke with the sunrise instead of her usual 5 a.m. alarm, took long walks through the countryside, and visited the farmer's market every Saturday, ostensibly for fresh produce, but really to see Evelyn. Their conversations grew longer each week. Evelyn would share stories about growing up on the farm, about her dreams of expanding their operation to include organic vegetables, about the community that had supported her family through difficult times. Harper found herself opening up in return, carefully editing her past but sharing her love of books, her secret passion for photography, and her growing appreciation for the slower pace of rural life. "You know," Evelyn said one Saturday as they walked through the market together, "you're different from what I expected when I first saw you." "Different how?" Harper asked, genuinely curious. "Well, you had this armor on, like you were ready for battle, but underneath, you're just real. Thoughtful, kind." Evelyn paused by a booth selling handmade quilts. "What do you do back in New York? You never really said." Harper's stomach clenched. "I work in business. Corporate consulting." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it felt like one. Evelyn nodded, but Harper caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Not suspicion, but perhaps an awareness that there was more to the story. That afternoon, Evelyn invited Harper to see the farm. They drove down a dirt road lined with oak trees, their leaves a brilliant tapestry of gold and crimson. The Carter farm was modest but well-maintained. A white farmhouse with green shutters, a red barn, fields of late-season crops, and the beehives that produced Evelyn's honey. "This land has been in my family for 4 generations, Evelyn explained, as they walked through the apple orchard. "My great-grandfather planted these trees. Every spring, they bloom like something out of a fairy tale." Harper watched Evelyn's face as she spoke about the farm, seeing the deep love and connection there. It was something Harper had never experienced. That sense of belonging, of being rooted to something larger than herself. "It must be nice," Harper said quietly, "to have that kind of continuity. That sense of home. Didn't you have that growing up?" Harper's laugh was bitter. "My parents were more interested in their social calendar than in creating a home. I learned early that the only person I could count on was myself." Evelyn stopped walking and turned to face her. "That sounds lonely." The simple observation hit Harper like a punch to the chest. She had spent so many years building walls, convincing herself that independence was strength, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen by another person. "It was," Harper admitted, the words coming out before she could stop them. "It is." Without hesitation, Evelyn reached out and took Harper's hand. The touch was gentle, warm, and completely unexpected. Harper's first instinct was to pull away. Physical affection made her uncomfortable, always had, but something about Evelyn's touch felt different, safe. "You don't have to be lonely here," Evelyn said softly. They stood there in the orchard, hands linked, surrounded by the scent of apples and the golden light of late afternoon. Harper felt something shift inside her chest, like ice beginning to thaw. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. That evening, Evelyn invited Harper to stay for dinner. They cooked together in the farmhouse kitchen, Evelyn teaching Harper how to make cornbread from scratch, while sharing stories about her grandmother's recipes. The kitchen was warm and lived in, with mismatched chairs around a wooden table, and mason jars filled with wildflowers on the windowsill. As they sat down to eat, Harper realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd had a home-cooked meal that wasn't prepared by a chef or delivered from an expensive restaurant. The simple food, fried chicken, green beans from the garden, cornbread with butter and honey, tasted better than any 5-star meal she'd ever had. "This is incredible," Harper said, and she meant it. "Food tastes better when it's made with love," Evelyn replied, then blushed slightly at her own words. After dinner, they sat on the front porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from books to dreams, to the way the stars looked different away from the city lights. "Harper," Evelyn said eventually, her voice soft in the darkness, "I hope you know you can trust me. Whatever brought you here, whatever you're running from, you don't have to carry it alone." Harper's throat tightened. She wanted to tell Evelyn everything, about the company, the scandal, the investigation, but she was terrified that the truth would shatter this fragile, beautiful thing growing between them. "Thank you," was all she managed to say, but she squeezed Evelyn's hand to show she meant it. As Harper drove back to the cabin that night, she realized she was in trouble. Not the legal kind she'd left behind in New York, but something far more dangerous. She was falling for Evelyn Carter, and she had no idea what to do about it. October painted Millbrook in shades of fire and gold, and Harper found herself extending her stay indefinitely. She told herself it was because the investigation was ongoing, that she needed more time away from the chaos. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving Evelyn. Their friendship had deepened into something Harper had never experienced before. They spent hours together, walking through the countryside, helping with the harvest, sitting by the fire in Evelyn's living room, reading books, and sharing comfortable silences. Harper had never been one for physical affection, but with Evelyn, she found herself craving the casual touches. A hand on her shoulder, fingers brushing as they passed a cup of coffee, the warmth of sitting close together on the porch swing. It was during the town's annual Harvest Festival that Harper finally acknowledged what was happening to her heart. The festival transformed Millbrook's main street into a celebration of autumn. Pumpkin displays, apple cider stands, local musicians playing on a makeshift stage, and families enjoying the crisp October evening. Evelyn had asked Harper to help her run the farm's booth, and Harper found herself genuinely enjoying the simple pleasure of talking to customers about honey and apples. "You're a natural at this," Evelyn said during a quiet moment, watching Harper explain the difference between wildflower and clover honey to a curious child. "I never thought I'd enjoy this." Harper gestured at the festival around them. "Community, simplicity. It's so different from what I'm used to." "What are you used to?" Harper hesitated. "Competition, isolation, always being on guard." She looked at Evelyn, beautiful in the golden light of the string lights overhead. "You've shown me a different way to live." As the evening progressed, the local band began playing slower songs, and couples started dancing in the street. Harper watched them with a mixture of longing and fear. She had never danced with anyone, never allowed herself that kind of vulnerability. "Dance with me?" Evelyn asked, extending her hand. Harper's first instinct was to refuse, to make an excuse. But something in Evelyn's eyes, hope, affection, patience, made her nod instead. They moved together slowly, Evelyn's hand warm in hers, the other resting gently on Harper's shoulder. Harper was stiff at first, hyper-aware of every eye that might be watching, but gradually, she relaxed into the rhythm, into the feeling of being held. "You're thinking too hard," Evelyn whispered, her breath warm against Harper's ear. "I always think too hard. Not always. Sometimes you just are. Like when you're reading on the porch or when you're watching the sunset, those moments when you forget to be guarded." Harper pulled back slightly to look at Evelyn's face. "You notice a lot. I notice you," Evelyn said simply, and the honesty in her voice made Harper's heart race. They were standing close now, closer than friends, and Harper could see the question in Evelyn's eyes. The same question that had been building between them for weeks. Harper had never kissed a woman, had never even considered it. Her few relationships with men had been strategic, emotionless affairs that served her career more than her heart. But looking at Evelyn now, feeling the warmth of her body, seeing the gentle affection in her eyes, Harper realized that everything she thought she knew about herself was wrong. "Evelyn," she whispered, not sure what she was asking. "It's okay," Evelyn said softly. "Whatever you're feeling, it's okay." The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Harper's world tilted on its axis as Evelyn's lips touched hers, soft and warm and tasting of apple cider. It was nothing like the calculated kisses she'd shared with men. This was pure emotion, connection, truth. When they broke apart, Harper was trembling. "I've never," she started, then stopped, overwhelmed. "I know," Evelyn said, her hand coming up to cup Harper's cheek. "We don't have to figure it all out tonight. We have time." But even as Evelyn spoke those comforting words, Harper's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her lawyer. "Investigation heating up. Need to discuss your return to NYC. Call me." The real world came crashing back, reminding Harper that she was living on borrowed time. She had built this beautiful, fragile thing with Evelyn on a foundation of half-truths and omissions. Eventually, the truth would come out, and when it did, it would destroy everything. That night, Harper lay awake in the cabin, her fingers touching her lips where Evelyn had kissed her. For the first time in her life, she understood what people meant when they talked about love, but she also understood that love might not be enough to bridge the gap between her world and Evelyn's. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at the cabin with fresh coffee and homemade biscuits, her smile bright and hopeful. "Good morning," she said, leaning in to kiss Harper's cheek with a naturalness that made Harper's heart ache. "Good morning," Harper replied, trying to match Evelyn's lightness despite the weight of her secrets. They spent the day working in Evelyn's garden, preparing it for winter. Harper found peace in the simple, honest work, pulling up spent plants, covering tender perennials, storing tools in the barn, but underneath the contentment was a growing sense of urgency. She needed to tell Evelyn the truth, but she was terrified of losing this, losing her. As the sun set, they sat on the porch swing, Evelyn's head resting on Harper's shoulder. "Harper," Evelyn said quietly, "I need you to know something. Whatever brought you here, whatever you're hiding, and I know you're hiding something, it doesn't change how I feel about you." Harper's breath caught. "How do you feel about me?" Evelyn lifted her head to look at Harper directly. "I'm falling in love with you. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated, but it's true." The words Harper had been longing to hear were also the ones that terrified her most, because now she had something real to lose. "Evelyn," she whispered, "there are things about me, about my life that you don't know, things that might change how you feel." "Try me," Evelyn said simply. Harper looked into those trusting brown eyes and felt her courage fail her. "Soon," she promised. "I'll tell you everything soon." But as they sat together in the gathering darkness, Harper wondered if she was making a promise she'd never be able to keep. November brought the first frost to Millbrook, and with it, a growing pressure that Harper could no longer ignore. Her lawyer's calls were becoming more frequent and urgent. The investigation was reaching a critical point, and her continued absence was raising questions. The board was growing impatient, and there were rumors of a hostile takeover attempt. But more pressing than any of that was the weight of her deception. Harper had been in Millbrook for 6 weeks now, and her relationship with Evelyn had deepened into something profound and real. They spent every day together, and Harper had never been happier or more terrified. Evelyn had opened her heart completely, sharing her dreams of expanding the farm, her fears about losing the land to developers, her hopes for the future. She spoke about that future as if Harper would be part of it, and Harper found herself wanting that more than she'd ever wanted anything. But she was living a lie, and it was eating her alive. The breaking point came on a gray Tuesday morning, when Harper was helping Evelyn repair a section of fence damaged by the previous night's storm. They worked in comfortable companionship, their breath visible in the cold air, when Evelyn's phone rang. "It's my cousin Jake," Evelyn said, answering the call. "Hey, Jake." "What?" "Slow down. You saw what on the news?" Harper's blood turned to ice as she watched Evelyn's expression change from confusion to shock to something approaching horror. "Are you sure it was her?" Evelyn asked, her eyes finding Harper's across the field. "Harper Lane." "Yes, I'll look it up. Thanks for calling." Evelyn hung up and stared at Harper for a long moment. "Jake says he saw someone who looks exactly like you on the business news. Something about a CEO and a scandal." Her voice was carefully neutral, but Harper could see the hurt beginning to form in her eyes. "Harper Lane. That's quite a coincidence, isn't it?" Harper's mouth went dry. "Evelyn." "Show me," Evelyn said quietly. "Show me your driver's license." With shaking hands, Harper pulled out her wallet and handed over her license. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment, reading the name. Harper Elizabeth Lane. "You lied to me," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For 6 weeks you've been lying to me." "I didn't lie exactly. I didn't tell you everything." "You didn't tell me anything." Evelyn's voice cracked with emotion. "You're not a consultant. You're the CEO of a billion-dollar company. You're under investigation for insider trading. And you've been pretending to be someone else this entire time." Harper reached for her, but Evelyn stepped back. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been playing house with the simple country girl? How you've been slumming it in our little town while your real life waited for you back in New York?" Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face now. "Was any of it real, Harper, or was I just entertainment while you hid from your problems?" "It was real," Harper said desperately. "Everything between us is real. I came here to hide, yes, but I stayed because of you. I stayed because for the first time in my life, I found something worth more than money or power or success. But you couldn't trust me with the truth." Harper's own tears started falling. "I was scared. I was scared you'd see me differently, that you'd think I was just another rich person playing games. I was scared you'd realize we're from completely different worlds and that this could never work. So you decided for me," Evelyn said bitterly. "You decided I couldn't handle the truth, that I wasn't worth the truth." "That's not—" "It is exactly that." Evelyn wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I told you I was falling in love with you, and you couldn't even tell me your real name." The words hit Harper like physical blows. She had destroyed the most beautiful thing in her life because she was too afraid to be vulnerable, too afraid to trust. "Evelyn, please, I know I messed up, but what we have is built on lies," Evelyn interrupted. "I don't even know who you really are." "You know me better than anyone ever has," Harper said desperately. "The person I am with you, that's the real me, more real than I've ever been with anyone." Evelyn shook her head. "The real you is someone who lies to people she claims to care about. The real you is someone who thinks she can buy her way out of any problem, including this one. That's not fair. Isn't it? You're a billionaire, Harper. You could buy this entire town if you wanted to. How do I know this isn't just another acquisition for you? How do I know you won't get bored and move on to the next interesting project?" Harper felt something break inside her chest. "Because I love you," she said, the words torn from her heart. "I love you. And I've never said that to anyone before in my life." Evelyn's face crumpled, and for a moment, Harper thought she might forgive her. But then Evelyn straightened, her expression hardening. "Love isn't enough if there's no trust," she said quietly. "I think you should go back to New York, Harper. Back to your real life. This is my real life now. You are my real life." "No," Evelyn said, turning away. "I'm just a chapter in your story, a vacation from reality, but reality is calling, and it's time for you to answer." Harper watched Evelyn walk away, her heart shattering with every step. She wanted to follow, to fight, to find the words that would make this right. But she knew Evelyn was right about one thing. She had broken the trust between them, and she didn't know how to fix it. That night, Harper sat in the cabin surrounded by the remnants of the life she'd built in Millbrook. Evelyn's honey still sat on the kitchen counter. A book they'd been reading together lay open on the coffee table. A photo they'd taken at the Harvest Festival was tucked into the mirror by the door. Her phone rang. Her lawyer again. "Harper, thank God. We need you back here immediately. The investigation is wrapping up, and there are decisions that need to be made. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss your future with the company." Harper stared out the window at the lights of Millbrook twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, Evelyn was probably crying, probably hating her, probably wondering how she could have been so wrong about someone. "I'll be there," Harper said finally. As she began to pack, Harper realized she was about to lose everything that mattered to her. Her company, her reputation, her future. None of it meant anything without Evelyn. But she had made her choice 6 weeks ago when she decided to hide the truth, and now she had to live with the consequences. The next morning, Harper loaded her car and took one last look at the cabin that had been her sanctuary. Then she drove through Millbrook one final time, past the farmer's market where she'd first seen Evelyn, past the farm where she'd learned what home could feel like. She didn't stop. She couldn't bear to see the hurt in Evelyn's eyes again. As the Tennessee hills disappeared in her rearview mirror, Harper felt like she was leaving her heart behind. She was going back to New York, back to her empire, back to the life she'd built on ambition and isolation. But she would never be the same person who had left 6 weeks ago. Evelyn had changed her, had shown her what love could be, what life could be. And even though she'd lost it all, Harper knew she would spend the rest of her life grateful for those perfect, impossible weeks when she'd been truly happy. The Meridian Tower felt like a mausoleum when Harper returned. The familiar marble lobby, the express elevator to the 47th floor, the corner office with its commanding view of Manhattan, everything that had once represented her success now felt hollow and cold. She had been gone for 6 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime. The emergency board meeting was brutal. Harper sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, facing 12 pairs of eyes that ranged from disappointed to openly hostile. The investigation had cleared her of criminal wrongdoing, but the damage to the company's reputation was severe. Stock prices had plummeted, major clients had jumped ship, and competitors were circling like vultures. "The question," said Richard Blackwood, his voice cutting through the tension, "is whether Lane Enterprises can survive with you at the helm, Harper. The market has lost confidence. Our shareholders are demanding answers." Harper listened to the litany of problems, the financial projections, the proposed solutions. 6 weeks ago, this would have consumed her completely. She would have fought tooth and nail to save her empire, would have sacrificed anything and anyone to maintain her position. But now, all she could think about was Evelyn's face when she'd realized the truth. The hurt, the betrayal, the way her eyes had gone cold and distant. "Harper." Richard's voice cut through her thoughts. "We need a decision. The board is prepared to offer you a generous severance package. You could step down gracefully, maintain your dignity, and we could bring in new leadership to rebuild confidence." Harper looked around the table at these people she'd worked with for years, people she'd considered allies if not friends. But she realized now that they were just as transactional as every other relationship in her life had been. When she was useful, they supported her. When she became a liability, they discarded her. "I need some time to consider," Harper said finally. "Time is a luxury we don't have," Richard replied. "The market opens in 3 hours. We need an answer." Harper stood up, her decision crystallizing. "Then here's your answer. I'm stepping down as CEO, effective immediately. I'll retain my shares, but I'm removing myself from day-to-day operations." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. This wasn't what they'd expected. Harper Lane never gave up without a fight. "Are you certain?" Richard asked. "This is your life's work." Harper thought about the life she'd built in Millbrook, about the peace she'd found in Evelyn's kitchen, about the way the sunrise looked over the Tennessee hills. "No," she said quietly. "This was my life's work. I'm ready for something different now." The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, press conferences, and transition meetings. Harper handled it all with a detached efficiency that surprised everyone, including herself. The media painted her departure as a fall from grace, but Harper felt something closer to relief. She sold her penthouse apartment and most of her possessions, keeping only what she truly needed. The process was liberating. She had spent so many years accumulating things, status symbols that were supposed to prove her worth, but none of it had ever made her happy. A week after stepping down, Harper found herself in her lawyer's office, finalizing the last of the paperwork. "I have to ask," her lawyer said. "What's your plan now? You're still incredibly wealthy, even after the stock losses. You could start another company, invest in startups, buy a small country if you wanted to." Harper smiled for the first time in days. "I'm thinking about farming," her lawyer laughed, thinking she was joking, but Harper was completely serious. That night, Harper sat in her temporary hotel room, staring at her phone. Evelyn's number was still in her contacts, and she had started to call a dozen times over the past week. But what could she say? That she was sorry? That she'd given up everything to prove her love was real? That she'd learned the difference between success and happiness? All of that was true, but it didn't change the fact that she had lied, that she had broken Evelyn's trust in the most fundamental way. Instead, Harper opened her laptop and began to write. If she couldn't find the words to say, maybe she could find the words to write. "Dear Evelyn, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough to undo the hurt I caused, but I need you to know that I am sorry. More sorry than I've ever been about anything in my life. You were right about everything. I was a coward. I was so afraid of losing you that I chose to lie instead of trusting you with the truth. I was so used to people wanting something from me, money, connections, power, that I couldn't believe someone could love me just for who I am. But you did. You loved the person I was with you, the person I became in Millbrook. That person was more real than I'd ever been before. You showed me what it meant to be truly happy, to be part of something bigger than myself, to love someone more than I loved my own ambitions. I've stepped down as CEO. I've left that life behind because I realized it was never really living at all. I don't know what comes next, but I know it won't include trying to buy my way back into your heart, or disrupting the life you've built. You deserve better than that. You deserve someone who trusts you enough to be vulnerable, someone who chooses honesty even when it's scary. I hope someday you can forgive me, not for my sake, but for yours. You have too much love in your heart to carry anger forever. I will love you for the rest of my life, even if I never see you again." Harper read the letter 3 times before hitting send. Then she closed her laptop, packed her remaining belongings, and prepared for the next chapter of her life. She didn't know where she was going or what she would do when she got there. But for the first time since leaving Millbrook, she felt something like hope. She had lost everything that she thought mattered, but she had gained something more valuable: the knowledge of who she really was and what she really wanted. The question now was whether it was too late to become that person. Spring came early to Tennessee that year, and with it, a stranger appeared in Millbrook. She drove a modest pickup truck instead of a luxury sedan, wore work boots instead of designer heels, and introduced herself simply as Harper to anyone who asked. She rented a small apartment above the hardware store and took a job at the local nursery, learning about soil composition and plant care with the same intensity she had once applied to quarterly reports and market analysis. Evelyn heard about the newcomer, of course. In a town of 847 people, news traveled fast. But she didn't seek Harper out, and Harper didn't approach her. They moved in parallel orbits, aware of each other but maintaining a careful distance. Harper threw herself into learning everything she could about sustainable farming and rural development. She spent her evenings reading agricultural journals and her weekends volunteering at local farms, slowly earning the trust of a community that had initially been suspicious of the city woman who'd appeared in their midst. It was at the monthly town council meeting that their paths finally crossed again. Harper had been attending the meetings for 2 months, listening to the challenges facing Millbrook: young people leaving for opportunities in larger cities, family farms struggling to compete with industrial agriculture, the constant threat of development companies buying up land for strip malls and subdivisions. That night, the main topic was the proposed sale of the old Morrison farm to a development company, The farm had been in the Morrison family for 3 generations, but the current owners were elderly and could no longer manage the land. The sale would bring in much-needed money for their retirement, but it would also mean the loss of 200 acres of prime farmland. "It's not just about the land," said Mayor Patricia Wells, a woman in her 60s who had lived in Millbrook her entire life. "It's about preserving our way of life, our community, but we can't ask the Morrisons to sacrifice their financial security for our ideals." Harper listened to the discussion, her mind racing. She had been thinking about this problem for weeks, ever since she'd learned about the proposed sale. She had the resources to help, but she also knew that any offer from her would be met with suspicion. She was still the outsider, still the wealthy woman who had disrupted their community once before. "What if there was another option?" Harper said, standing up. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. "What if someone could match the developer's offer but keep the land in agricultural use?" "That's a nice idea," said Councilman Bob Fletcher, "but who's got that kind of money around here?" Harper took a deep breath. "I do." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Harper caught sight of Evelyn in the back row, her face unreadable. "Now hold on," Mayor Wells said, raising her hand for quiet. "Harper, we appreciate your interest in our community, but this is a serious matter. We're talking about a significant financial commitment." "I understand that," Harper replied. "I'm proposing to purchase the Morrison farm at the full asking price, with the condition that it remains in agricultural use. I'd like to establish it as a community-supported agriculture program, providing fresh produce to local families and creating jobs for young people who want to stay in Millbrook." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Evelyn stood up. "Why?" she asked, her voice carrying across the room. "Why would you do that?" Harper met her eyes for the first time in 5 months. "Because this community gave me something I'd never had before. Because I learned here that success isn't measured in dollars, but in the connections we make and the good we do for others. Because I want to give back to the place that taught me how to live." "And what do you get out of it?" asked Bob Fletcher, his tone skeptical. "The chance to be part of something meaningful," Harper said simply. "The chance to help preserve what makes Millbrook special." The debate continued for another hour, with questions about Harper's intentions, her qualifications, and her long-term commitment to the community. Harper answered each question honestly, acknowledging her past mistakes while outlining her vision for the farm's future. When the meeting ended, the council agreed to present Harper's proposal to the Morrison family. As people filed out of the community center, Harper found herself alone with Evelyn. "That was quite a speech," Evelyn said, her tone neutral. "I meant every word of it. Did you? Or is this just another way to try to buy your way back into everyone's good graces?" Harper flinched at the accusation, but she understood it. "I know how it looks. I know you have every reason not to trust me. But this isn't about buying forgiveness. This is about doing what's right for the community." Evelyn studied her for a long moment. "You look different," she said finally. Harper glanced down at her worn jeans and flannel shirt, her hands that now bore the calluses of honest work. "I am different. Or maybe I'm finally who I was always meant to be. People don't change that much, Harper. Not really." "You're right," Harper said. "People don't change, but they can choose to become who they really are instead of who they think they should be. You showed me that." Evelyn's expression softened slightly, but she still kept her distance. The Harper I knew was someone who lied to people she claimed to care about. The Harper you knew was someone who was terrified of being vulnerable, of being rejected for who she really was. "I'm still terrified, but I'm trying to be brave enough to be honest, even when it hurts." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. "I got your letter," Evelyn said quietly. Harper's heart jumped. "I didn't know if you'd read it. I read it. Multiple times." Evelyn paused. "It was a beautiful letter, Harper. But letters are just words. Actions matter more." "Then judge me by my actions," Harper said. "Not the ones from 6 months ago, but the ones I'm taking now. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I'm just asking for the opportunity to prove that I've learned from my mistakes." Evelyn nodded slowly. "We'll see," she said, and walked away. Over the next few weeks, Harper worked tirelessly to make the community farm a reality. She met with agricultural experts, drew up business plans, and consulted with local farmers about the best crops for the region. The Morrison family agreed to her proposal, and the town council voted to support the project. Harper also continued her work at the nursery and her volunteer efforts around town. She helped repair the roof of the community center, organized a fundraiser for the local school's music program, and quietly paid for groceries for families struggling to make ends meet. She didn't do any of it for recognition or to impress anyone. She did it because it felt right, because she had finally found a way to use her resources and skills to make a real difference in people's lives. Slowly, the community began to accept her, not as the wealthy outsider who had caused a scandal, but as Harper, the woman who showed up when help was needed, who listened more than she spoke, who had chosen to make Millbrook her home. The transformation wasn't lost on Evelyn, who watched from a distance as Harper integrated herself into the fabric of the community. She saw Harper at the farmer's market, not as a customer but as a vendor, selling vegetables from her own small garden. She saw her at town events, not standing apart, but participating fully, laughing with neighbors and helping with cleanup. One evening in late May, as Harper was closing up the nursery, Evelyn appeared in the doorway. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," Harper replied, her heart racing. "I heard the Morrison Farm project got final approval." "Yes. We'll break ground on the community garden next month. The first harvest should be ready by late summer." Evelyn nodded. "That's good. The town needs something like that." They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Evelyn spoke again. "I also heard you turned down the development company's offer to buy your land in New York for twice what you paid for the Morrison farm." Harper shrugged. "I don't need the money, and I didn't want to contribute to more urban sprawl. You really have changed, haven't you?" Harper met her eyes. "I've become who I always should have been. Who I was when I was with you, before fear made me hide behind lies." Evelyn took a step closer. "I've been thinking about what you said, about judging you by your current actions instead of your past mistakes. And I think maybe we could try being friends again. Start over, build something new based on honesty this time." Harper's heart soared, even as she tried to keep her expectations in check. I'd like that very much." "Good," Evelyn said, a small smile playing at her lips. "Because I could use some help with my booth at the farmer's market this weekend, if you're interested." "I'm very interested," Harper said, and for the first time in months she felt truly hopeful about the future. As Evelyn walked away, Harper realized that this was just the beginning. She had lost Evelyn's love through her own mistakes, but maybe, with time and patience and unwavering honesty, she could earn something even more valuable: Evelyn's trust. And maybe, if she was very lucky and very careful with the gift she was being given, that trust might someday bloom into love again. The sun was setting over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Harper locked up the nursery and walked home through the quiet streets of the town that had become her sanctuary and her second chance. She had given up an empire to find herself, and in doing so, she had discovered that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the connections we make and the love we give and receive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself worthy of the community's trust and Evelyn's friendship. But tonight, Harper was content to be exactly where she was, home,